trills, taps, and flaps. These are the sounds which are also of very interest to the experts of linguistics and particularly to the students of phonetics and phonology. Because at times, in order to describe them fully, we need to differentiate between, trills and taps and flaps, and then also within taps and flaps, because these are different terms and they describe different sounds, right? So the trills, taps, and flaps are central approximant, right? They are produced from the center of the mouth cavity, and they are normally written as r in the English orthography, but they are pronounced differently, right? And of course, the IPS symbols are different for them. Tap and flap are to some extent similar. I'm using the word to some extent because flap is different, of course, because phonetically flap is different, okay? And also in phonologically, because languages also distinguish among these two. But the similarity within these two sounds is that they are, produced while there is one single stroke of the tongue, right? Like, I'm unable to pronounce it completely because the speakers of Indo-Aryan and Iranian languages, we are very much habitual to produce the typical r sound, r, so which is trill, right? And this is the flap is r. So in l, if you see, the tongue is touching only once, right? The roof of your mouth. So that's the similarity within taps and flaps, that there is only one movement of the tip of the tongue. But in the case of trill is rapidly in contact, and there are strikes, right? Because in the case of trill, your tongue is set in motion, right? It is set in motion and it is striking continuously, right? Like r, right? So typical trill is r. In some languages, we have quite a longer, this continuous strike, right? Like r, right? But in other languages, we can also have very small amount of this continuous striking. So that can also be distinguished by the students of phonetics and phonology. In tap and flap, that there's this single contraction of muscles, single, contact between your tongue and the roof of the mouth. And then the structure of the intermittent closure is similar to all these central approximants. And the flap and tap distinction we can discuss like the American typical, gesture for r sound when the tip of is moving up and down. Like in pere, right? The American would pronounce pt, like pere, right? The r, but not exactly r. It's something midway between t and r. So that is one example of tap. And then we also have this typical l sound in abundance in Pakistani regional languages, in Hindi, Urdu, Sindhi, Punjabi, Pashto, right? Almost every Pakistani language has this sound l. And it's basically the difference between the tap and the flap is that in the case of tap, it is just touching the roof of the mouth and then coming down, right? But in the case of flap, it is going back. So this curve is really important. This curling of your tip of the tongue, right? So it's like the curling of your tip of the tongue, right? And it's producing this sound l, right? And this is the apical sound, because in apical we are using just the tip of the tongue. And in the case of trill, in words like rai and ro, which is a typical trill, is the part of a Scottish inventory, r, right? So that's not found in American language, and the articulator is set in motion for current, striking, and the sound is a trill. Let me show you this list of trills and taps and flaps within world languages, and we would also try to differentiate between among these three types of r sounds. All right, we have the voiced alveolar trill, right? In word like pero, right? This is common in English and also in typical in the Scottish variety of English. Then the voiced alveolar tap, right? And you just see the difference between these two sounds, okay? So that's the difference between trill and tap. And to show you the difference between the symbols, let me zoom in for you, right? So you see the difference between r, trill, and tap, and then also this retroflex symbol below r. It makes the sound a flap, and flap is l, okay? And then the voiced alveolar approximant, which is from alveolar basically, right? So that's also an approximant in word like red in English, right? So that's also a different symbol here. And then the voiced alveolar fricative trill. So it's basically trill, but it is fricative also. So it's not the exactly approximant because it's stronger than approximant, and it becomes like fricative. There is a found friction in this. And then the voiced alveolar trill, when it's like r, r. If you just use your alveolar, right, alveolar part of the oral cavity, and then the voiced alveolar fricative or approximant, when it's the same place, it's the alveolar, but it's not the trill, but it is fricative, right? So you just see the difference between these two, that this is trill and this is fricative. And then voiced bilabial trill, right? It's bilabial. You are putting your lips together, right? Like ba, ba, but it's in the case of trill, right? And then there is one more possibility, although there is no symbol given by IPA, but that's the voiced labiodental flap, right? Because your lower lip is touching your upper teeth, and the flap sound is created, right? And that is found in Margi word, right? So these are the possibilities. Margi is the language, and the word used is this one, right? So these are various forms of trills, taps, and flaps, and as students of phonetics, we should know the difference among them.